4 days. That's how long a German Shepherd puppy named Laya waited beneath the same bus stop bench in Pasadena, California. She was just 5 months old, black and tan, her small frame curled tightly against the metal pole as if it could protect her. Every time a bus rumbled close, she would lift her head, ears pry-cricked, eyes wide with desperate hope. And every time the doors opened and strangers stepped out, her face sank again. I saw her first on my way home from work. At first I thought she was just a stray pup looking for scraps. But something about the way she didn't move struck me. The little shepherd didn't chase people, didn't sniff trash, didn't wander. She only watched the buses as if waiting for a face that never appeared. I drove past again the next day. Same spot, same posture. Her ribs pressed against her skin when she shifted, but still she sat with that silent loyalty only a dog can hold. I felt a twist in my chest. I used to drive these routes for years back when I worked as a bus driver. Now retired, I knew every bench, every schedule, every corner, and I knew no one was coming for her. By the third day, the story was the same. Passengers came and went. She lifted her head for each arrival, lowered it again when the person she longed for didn't appear. This German Shepherd puppy wasn't lost in the city. She was abandoned in plain sight. That evening, I pulled over and walked toward her. Her black and tan fur looked dusty, her paws stretched out against the sidewalk. She didn't bark or growl. She just looked at me, then back at the bus. My name is Mark, and in that moment, I felt like she was silently begging me to understand the truth. The truth that someone had left her here. The truth that she had been waiting faithfully for 4 endless days. And the truth that I couldn't leave her waiting one day more. But she wasn't ready to move just yet. I crouched down a few feet from her, keeping my voice low and calm. She didn't move, didn't flinch, just kept her eyes fixed on the empty road where the next bus would come. Her body trembled, but it wasn't from fear of me. It was from waiting. Every sound of brakes, every hiss of air made her lift her head with aching hope. I placed a small bowl of water near the bench. She looked at it, then back at the road, torn between thirst and loyalty. Finally, she crept forward, our paws dragging slightly, and lapped at the water without ever taking her gaze off the street. The little pup was surviving, but she wasn't living. Her world was narrowed to a single bench and the memory of a person who had vanished. I set down some food next. Her nose twitched, but she didn't devour it the way a stray dog usually would. Instead, she nibbled slowly, almost reluctantly, like a child afraid to miss their parents' return. She was thin, fragile, yet every line of her body showed devotion. She wasn't a wandering stray pup. She was a loyal puppy who believed her person would come back. I sat on the ground close enough to let her see I wasn't a threat, far enough to give her space. She glanced at me once, her eyes dark and wet, then turned back toward the bus lane. In her silence, I heard everything. The questions, the hurt, the endless patience only a dog can carry. I thought of how many people had walked past her in these 4 days, each one too busy, too blind to stop. The buses kept coming. Each time the hiss of the doors echoed. She lifted her head, ears forward, heart pounding. And each time when strangers walked past her, I could see another piece of hope slipping away. She didn't trust me yet, but she also hadn't given up. She was still. She was still waiting, still loyal, still holding on to a promise that had already been broken. And I knew I had to stay with her until she was ready to let go. The third night came and she was still there. The streets of Pasadena quieted after the last wave of commuters. But that little pup didn't move from her post. The glow of the street light made her fur shine in patches, and her eyes caught every passing shadow, always searching. A four-legged friend shouldn't have to wait alone in the dark, but she did. Curled against the cold bench like it was the only shelter she knew, I watched as another bus slowed to the stop. Her head shot up, her ears perked, her tail lifted just slightly with fragile hope. But as the doors opened and a handful of people stepped out, she sank back down, lowering herself as if bracing against another heartbreak. That tiny gesture cut through me more than words ever could. She wasn't just a stray pup. She was an orphaned puppy clinging to a dream that someone, anyone, would finally step off that bus for her. I sat down another small plate of food and slid it gently closer. She leaned forward, sniffed, and after a long pause, began to eat. Each cautious bite was a battle between hunger and faith. her gaze darting back toward the street after every chew. Even while filling her empty stomach, she refused to fully leave her post. It was as if she believed that taking her eyes off the road for too long would mean missing the return of the person she loved. I sat with her, whispering soft words into the night. She didn't understand them, but she felt the tone, the rhythm, the presence. Her body stopped trembling just for a while. The loyal puppy shifted slightly, curling not only against the bench, but closer to where I sat. It wasn't trust yet, but it was the beginning of something fragile and rare. The city buses came less frequently as the hours stretched on, but every single one still held her attention. The hiss of brakes would jolt her up. The empty steps down would sink her lower. Her spirit was being tested in front of me over and over, and still she didn't give in. That kind of faith in an abandoned puppy felt almost unbearable to watch. And as the last bus for the night roared away, leaving the stop in silence, she lay back down with her nose pressed to her paws. I realized then that if she could endure another night waiting, I could endure it with her. But she didn't know yet that the waiting was almost over. The next morning, the sun rose over Pasadena and found her exactly where I had left her. The little pup was stretched out against the bench leg, paws tucked under, eyes half up open, as though she hadn't truly slept. When the first bus pulled in, she lifted her head with a sudden burst of energy, scanning the faces that stepped down. And when she realized none of them belonged to the person she longed for, she lowered herself again, her tail curling close to her body. I walked toward her slowly, carrying fresh water and a bit of food. Her ears twitched at the sound of my steps, but she didn't retreat. Instead, she looked up at me for a second, then turned her gaze back to the street. The loyal puppy was still torn between survival and faith, but her body betrayed her need. She leaned ever so slightly closer to me this time. I sat down beside her, my back against the cool metal of the bus shelter. She glanced sideways, her nose quivering, and then rested her chin on her paws. Her ribs still showed, her coat dusty, but there was a dignity in the way she carried herself. This was no stray pup chasing scraps. She was a faithful little companion, refusing to let go of a broken promise. A gentle breeze carried the smell of morning coffee and exhaust, and I noticed how she reacted differently now. Before, every sound of a bus had sent her springing up. Now she stayed low, only lifting her head halfway. The brave pup's hope was fraying at the edges, worn thin by too many disappointments. It was painful to watch, yet it also felt like the first step toward release. I reached out, keeping my hand low to the ground. She sniffed, hesitated, then let her nose brush my fingers before quickly pulling back. That tiny touch, that fleeting moment of trust, felt like the world shifting under us both. I didn't need her to leap into my arms. I just needed her to know I wasn't another person passing by. As the day wore on, she stayed close to the bench, but no longer hid beneath it. She allowed herself to stretch out a little, her body angled toward me instead of away. I saw in her the spark of a young dog ready to choose life over waiting. If only she could find the courage. And when the next bus pulled up, she didn't rise at all. She only looked at me, eyes questioning as if asking whether it was finally safe to stop waiting. I came back that evening with a blanket folded under my arm. She was still there, curled in the same spot, though her eyes seemed heavier, her movements slower. When I spread the blanket near the bench, she lifted her head, ears flicking, uncertain of my intentions. But when I sat down and stayed still, the little pup lowered herself back down, watching every move with quiet intensity. I placed more food beside her, and this time she didn't hesitate as long. She padded forward on cautious paws, sniffed, and ate until the last piece was gone. Her tail gave one tentative flick, barely visible, but it was there. That small gesture was the first spark of a playful puppy hidden beneath the exhaustion and heartbreak. It reminded me that under all the waiting, she was still a young dog who deserved joy. I spoke softly, telling her nonsense words, letting her hear the rhythm of a voice that wouldn't leave. The rescued puppy tilted her head as if curious, then lay down near the edge of the blanket, closer than she had ever been. Her eyes followed my hands, my face, but more than anything, they kept darting back to the road. The shepherd pup still hadn't given up on the person she once trusted. When another bus approached, I braced myself for her to spring up again. But instead, she only lifted her chin, ears twitching, and then laid her head back down. The loyal puppy was beginning to realize the truth. Her heart resisted, and in that moment her gaze shifted toward me. Not long, not deep, but enough to make me feel the weight of her decision forming. I stayed until night fell. The blanket between us, the quiet hum of traffic around us both. Her body finally relaxed, her breathing slowing, and for the first time I saw her sleep. A furry pup shouldn't have to guard a bus stop through the night, but she had now. She allowed herself to drift off with someone beside her. The city lights glowed against her black and tan coat, her chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. And I knew that tomorrow, when she opened her eyes, the choice of whether to keep waiting or to take a new step would be closer than ever. The next morning, I found her still curled on the blanket where I had left it. Her eyes blinked open slowly, heavy from exhaustion. But when she saw me, she didn't pull away. Instead, the little pup stretched her paws, her nails scraping the sidewalk, and let out the smallest sigh. It was the sound of a tired soul who had been holding on too long. I poured fresh water into the bowl, and she drank eagerly this time, lapping until drops splashed against her chin. The stray pup was no longer ignoring her needs for the sake of waiting. She was beginning to accept care. It struck me how powerful that shift was. For 4 days, she had survived on faith alone. But now she was letting herself trust, if only in tiny pieces. I set down another small portion of food, and she came forward faster than before. Her body still tense, she paused often to glance at the road, but she didn't stop eating. Each bite felt like a step away from being an abandoned puppy. A step toward becoming a rescued puppy. The loyal puppy within her was still holding on to the memory of whoever left her. But hunger was teaching her that life could offer more than empty promises. I kept my distance, my hands resting on my knees, speaking to her in a soft rhythm. She listened, tilting her head, ears twitching, and for a brief moment, her gaze locked with mine. In those eyes, I saw pain, yes, but also the faintest flicker of curiosity, the whisper of a playful puppy waiting to be uncovered. It was fragile, but it was real. When the midday bus arrived, she startled as usual. But something was different. Her body tensed, ears pricked, yet she didn't bolt forward. She only watched as passengers stepped off, then lowered her head slowly as if realizing the truth again. This young dog was starting to believe what her heart didn't want to admit, that no one was coming. The sun was high, shadows sharp when she made her first real choice. Instead of retreating under the bench, she circled once, twice, and then lay down directly on the blanket I had placed. Her chest pressed into its folds, her paws tucked neatly, her eyes facing the street, but her body closer to me than ever before. And in that quiet moment I realized the brave pup had taken her first step. Not toward me, not fully, but away from the endless waiting. A small shift, but one that would change everything about what came next. That afternoon I stayed longer, watching the small dog test the edges of her courage. She circled the bench, sniffing where I had sat, her paws cautious but not retreating. Every movement was slow, deliberate, as though the world might vanish if she stepped too far. The abandoned puppy wasn't running anymore. She was beginning to wonder if safety could exist outside her post. When I reached out, palm low, she stopped just inches away. Her nose twitched, drawing in my scent, her chest rising and falling with sharp little breaths. Then, in one trembling moment, the loyal puppy pressed her nose to my hand. It was only a touch, brief and unsure, but it shattered the wall she had built around her heart. I whispered her name, the one I had given her silently in my mind. Laya. The orphaned puppy lifted her eyes to mine, holding the gaze longer than ever before. I saw fear, yes, but also the shadow of something softer, something that might grow into trust. Her ears tilted forward, her body half tensed, waiting to see what I would do next. I didn't move. I just stayed still, letting her know she didn't have to fear a sudden grab or a false promise. After a long pause, she lowered herself to the ground beside me, her side brushing the blanket. Her tail gave a single uncertain wag, the kind that told me her heart was wrestling between doubt and hope. The brave pup leaned her head down and sighed, as if the weight of the waiting was too much for her small body to hold. A four-legged friend shouldn't have to carry betrayal, But she had carried it longer than most humans could bear. Now she was letting me carry just a little of it with her. A bus pulled in across the street, the familiar hiss of brakes filling the air. Her ears perked, her head lifted, and for a second I thought she would rush forward again. But she didn't move. She only looked back at me, her body tense, but grounded, as if torn between two worlds, the one that abandoned her and the one that might finally keep her. That moment told me she was ready for more than waiting. She was ready for the first step into something new, even if she didn't know it yet. That night I returned with a leash looped gently in my hand, unsure if she would ever let me use it. The little pup was lying on the blanket again, her head resting on her paws, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. When she saw me, she didn't run. She only blinked slowly, as if she had already decided I wasn't a threat. The abandoned puppy shifted forward, tail brushing against the concrete in the faintest movement of recognition. I placed food on the ground as I had before, and this time she came almost immediately. Her paws padded softly against the sidewalk, her body leaning low but steady. Each bite was quicker now, less guarded, the hunger outweighing hesitation. The stray pup wasn't just surviving anymore. She was beginning to let herself trust. I waited until she finished before sliding the leash across the ground. She sniffed it, ears tilting, unsure of the strange object between us. Her body stiffened, but she didn't retreat to the shadows of the bench. Instead, she sat watching me, her dark eyes searching for the meaning behind my offering. In that silence, the loyal puppy was asking whether this was another trick, another disappointment, or the start of something real. I didn't force it. I only held the loop open, letting the cool night breeze carry my calm voice toward her. Minutes passed, and still we stayed in that fragile space between fear and trust. Finally, her paw shifted forward, then the other, until her nose brushed the leash again. It wasn't acceptance, not yet, but it was permission to stay close. The brave pup circled once and then lay back down, her side touching the blanket, her gaze fixed not on the road, but on me. For the first time, the buses passed without pulling her attention away. Her loyalty was no longer chained to the hope of a returning figure. It was drifting cautiously in my direction. I knew tomorrow I would try again, a little braver, a little closer, and I knew she was almost ready to make her choice, the one that would change both our lives. The next morning came with soft lights spilling across the bus stop, and she was waiting as always. But something had shifted. Her body was no longer pressed so tightly against the bench. She was stretched out on the blanket, her eyes softer, her breathing calmer. The little pup still carried the weight of heartbreak, but now she let me sit closer without flinching. I brought out the leash again, laying it gently beside the food. This time she didn't retreat. The loyal puppy leaned forward, sniffed, and then kept eating while the leash rested against her paws. It was such a small thing, but it told me she was starting to trust that not every hand reaching for her meant abandonment. When a bus arrived, I braced myself for the familiar heartbreak of watching her hopes rise and crash. The hiss of brakes echoed. The doors opened and she lifted her head. But instead of rushing to the curb, she only stared for a moment before turning back toward me. The rescued puppy had begun to believe that maybe, just maybe, her future wasn't tied to that endless waiting. I slipped my hand slowly toward the leash, letting her see every movement. Her ears flicked back, her body tense, but she didn't bolt. Her tail twitched against the blanket, an uncertain signal of fear colliding with curiosity. The brave pup had carried betrayal in her chest for too long, and now she stood on the edge of deciding whether to risk her heart again. I whispered her name, Leela, and her head tilted, her eyes locking onto mine. In that moment I wasn't just a passerby. I was part of her fragile circle, someone she hadn't pushed away. And when she leaned her head forward until her nose brushed my knee, I knew she had taken another step toward letting go of the pain. The small dog lowered herself beside me, her body pressed halfway to the blanket, her gaze still flicking toward the road. She hadn't given up her watch completely, but for the first time, she was letting herself rest in my presence. I realized then that the waiting was almost over. All she needed was one more push of courage, and she would leave the bench behind forever. That evening, the street was quieter than usual, the glow of the setting sun painting long shadows across the pavement. She was waiting again, but not with the same desperate stiffness of before. Her body was looser, her eyes softer, and when I approached, the little pup lifted her head as if she had been expecting me. I sat close, the leash coiled in my hand, my heart pounding with the weight of what might come next. I laid the food down, and she moved forward without hesitation, her paws pressed against the concrete, her tail flicking once, twice. The stray pup was no longer starving just for food. She was hungry for connection. When she finished, I let the leash slide between us again, waiting, offering, hoping. This time, when her nose touched the loop, I moved slowly, carefully, and slipped it over her neck. For a second, her body went rigid, ears pinned back, eyes wide with fear. The abandoned puppy froze, as if the leash might pull her back to the path she had fought so hard to escape. I whispered her name, kept my hands steady, and waited. Her chest heaved, her breaths quick and sharp, but she didn't pull away. Her gaze darted to the road, to the buses that had betrayed her faith again and again. Then she turned back to me, trembling but still. The loyal puppy had chosen not to run this time. I eased my hand onto her back, feeling the roughness of her fur beneath my palm. Her muscles twitched, her body ready to flee, but instead she leaned ever so slightly into the touch. It was as if the brave pup had decided that if she was going to risk everything, she would risk it now with me. I stood, leash in hand, and she followed, not with the confident stride of a playful puppy. Not yet, but with hesitant steps, her paws moving in sync with mine. The four-legged friend who had once been chained to a bench of false hope was finally walking forward. And as we took those first fragile steps together, I knew the waiting was over. Her journey was just beginning. The first walk away from that bus stop was shaky, her paws moving slow and uncertain, the leash light but unfamiliar against her neck. She glanced back once, her ears flicking toward the bench. She had guarded for 4 long days, then lowered her head and kept following me. The little pup wasn't walking with confidence yet, but each step forward was a piece of her heart untangling from the past. We moved carefully down the street, the blanket bundled under my arm, the leash loose in my hand. The abandoned puppy stayed close, her tail tucked, but she didn't resist. Every few steps she paused, sniffed the air, and then looked up at me with eyes that asked the same question over and over. Was this real? Could she finally stop waiting? I led her gently toward my truck, opening the back where I'd laid the blanket across the seat. At first she froze, her paws rooted to the pavement. The stray pup had never been asked to trust this much, not to step into a space she couldn't control. I knelt down, coaxing softly, and after a long hesitation, she leapt inside and curled against the blanket that smelled like her. On the way home, she pressed her nose to the window, ears twitching at every sound. Her chest rose and fell quickly, not from panic now, but from the swirl of a new world she was stepping into. The rescued puppy was finally leaving behind the street that had held her prisoner. When we pulled into my driveway, she sat tall, eyes wide, tail flicking once against the seat. Inside the house, she paced first, sniffing corners, circling rugs, testing the edges of her new reality. Her paws tapped against the hardwood floors, her head darting at the smallest noises. But slowly she settled near the couch, lying down on the blanket as if she understood this was hers. Now the brave pup had survived abandonment, but here she was choosing to rest. The next day I brought her to the local vet just for a check. She trembled on the table, her body stiff, but the kind hands and calm voices reassured her. The young dog was thin, tired but otherwise strong, her heart steady, her body resilient, her spirit intact. It was confirmation of what I already knew. This little companion was built to survive and built to love. When we returned home, she curled at my feet, her head resting on my boot as if claiming me as her anchor. The loyal puppy who had once waited for someone who never returned had chosen a new place to wait by my side. And in that quiet moment I realized this wasn't the end of her journey. It was only the beginning of something she had been searching for all along. Yayla's story still echoes in my chest every time I see her sprawled across the rug, paws twitching in sleep, no longer shivering on cold concrete. The little pup who once counted buses and passengers, clinging to the hope of someone who would never return, has found her place in the world. She doesn't wait by the road anymore. She waits for me to come home, her tail wagging, her eyes bright with trust. This journey showed me something powerful. How a rescued puppy can carry the weight of betrayal and still choose love again. Her patience, her courage, her quiet strength turned a bus stop into a story of survival and a home into a promise of forever. The brave pup who once curled under a bench now runs free in the yard. A four-legged friend who reminds me daily that loyalty never dies. It only needs to be met with compassion. This little guy's journey from abandonment to rehabilitation shows how important nonprofit rescue groups really are. Caring for a rescued puppy is more than love. It's responsibility. It's pet care. Every act of kindness, every story shared helps another stray pup like Laya find their way home. If her story touched your heart, please like, comment, and share this video. Spreading her journey could be the reason another orphan puppy is saved tomorrow.